The sun painted the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold, as Bethany Cole clutched her tattered shawl against the biting October wind of 1876. 3 months had passed since her father's sudden death left her with nothing but debts and a ramshackle cabin at the edge of Whitewater Creek. Today marked the final blow. The bank had officially foreclosed on the only home she'd ever known. "Miss Cole," the banker called from his buggy, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'll need those keys by sundown tomorrow." Bethany nodded stiffly, refusing to let him see her tears. At 22, she had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and only $7 to her name. The mining town of Silver Gulch lay 20 miles north, her only hope for work and shelter before winter descended on the territory. As the banker's buggy disappeared down the dirt road, Bethany sank to her knees in the dying garden her mother had once tended so lovingly. 10 years ago, consumption had taken her mother. Now her father's heart had failed him, leaving Bethany entirely alone in a world that seemed determined to break her. "I should have known," she whispered to the wind. "Nothing good ever stays." The next morning dawned cold and clear. Bethany packed her meager belongings: 2 dresses, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and a faded photograph of her parents on their wedding day. With a final glance at the cabin that had sheltered her for all her years, she locked the door, left the key under the mat as instructed, and began the long walk toward Silver Gulch. By midday, her boots had worn blisters on her heels, and her stomach growled with hunger. The road stretched endlessly before her, winding through golden aspen groves and rugged pine forests. Bethany had never traveled this far alone, and despite the beauty surrounding her, fear gnawed at her insides. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap to her throat. Travelers could be dangerous for a woman alone, her father had warned her countless times. Bethany stepped quickly off the road, seeking shelter behind a large boulder. A lone rider appeared around the bend, tall in the saddle atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The man wore a worn leather duster, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Something about his easy posture suggested confidence without menace. "Afternoon, miss," he called, reining his horse to a stop. "Mighty long road to be walking alone." Bethany hesitated, clutching her small bag tighter. "I'm fine, sir, just making my way to Silver Gulch." The rider tilted his head, revealing a sun-bronzed face with keen blue eyes. "Silver Gulch is another 15 miles. You won't make it before dark." He gestured to the western sky where clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming, too." As if to confirm his words, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains. "I'll manage," Bethany said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. The man studied her for a moment, then swung down from his saddle with fluid grace. "Name's Xavier Blackwood. Most folks call me Zav." He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles from here. You're welcome to wait out the storm there. I'm heading to Silver Gulch myself tomorrow." "I don't accept charity from strangers, Mr. Blackwood," Bethany replied, lifting her chin despite the exhaustion weighing her down. A smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Not charity, miss, just being neighborly." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Besides, getting soaked to the bone and catching pneumonia won't help whatever situation you're running from." "I'm not running," she protested. The words faltered on her tongue. "Looking for something new," he suggested gently. Bethany nodded, surprised by his perception. "Well then," Xavier said, "consider my offer. A dry place to sleep, hot food, and a ride to town tomorrow. No strings attached." He held up his hands as if to prove his sincerity. "I give you my word as a gentleman." Another rumble of thunder, closer now, made Bethany's decision for her. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I accept your hospitality for the night." "Good choice," he said, then offered his hand. "May I help you up?" Cautiously, Bethany placed her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle as he helped her mount the stallion. Xavier gathered the reins and began leading the horse on foot. "You don't have to walk," Bethany protested. "I can walk alongside." "My mother raised me better than to ride while a lady walks," he replied simply. "Besides, thunder here's carried heavier loads than you through mountain passes." This is nothing to him. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic clopping of thunder's hooves and the increasing wind through the pines. Bethany studied her rescuer from her perch. Xavier Blackwood moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His shoulders were broad beneath his duster, his stride long and unhurried. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked finally. "Cattle," he answered. "I've got a small spread about 20 miles south of Silver Gulch, been building it up for 5 years now. You're a rancher then?" He nodded. "Started with just 10 head and a dream, up to 200 now, not the biggest operation, but it's mine." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "What about you, miss?" "Cole, Bethany Cole," she supplied. "I'm looking for work in Silver Gulch. My father passed recently, and the bank took our home." Xavier glanced back at her, sympathy in his blue eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Cole. Silver Gulch is growing fast, should be work for a capable woman." The first fat raindrops began to fall as a small cabin came into view. It sat nestled against a hillside, smoke curling from its chimney. "You left a fire burning?" Bethany asked, surprised. Xavier shook his head. "My foreman, Josiah, is probably there. He watches the place when I'm gone." As they approached, the cabin door swung open, and an older man with a salt and pepper beard stepped onto the porch. "'Bout time you showed up, Zav. Storm's rolling in fast." His eyes widened at the sight of Bethany. "And you've brought company." Miss Cole was heading to Silver Gulch on foot, Xavier explained, helping Bethany down from the horse. "Thought we'd offer her shelter for the night." Josiah tipped his hat. "Welcome, miss. Any friend of Zav's is welcome here." "Thank you," Bethany said, suddenly self-conscious about her travel-worn appearance. The cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable inside. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, casting flickering light across a wooden table, several chairs, and a small bookshelf crammed with volumes. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "Make yourself at home," Xavier said, hanging his duster and hat on pegs by the door. "Josiah makes a mean venison stew." The older man was already stirring a pot hanging over the fire. "Been simmering all day, you're just in time." The storm hit in earnest as they settled around the table. Rain lashed at the windows, and thunder shook the little cabin, but inside all was warm and surprisingly convivial. Bethany found herself relaxing as the men shared stories of ranch life, careful to include her in their conversation without prying into her circumstances. After dinner, Josiah announced he was heading to the bunkhouse, where the other ranch hands stayed when working this section of Xavier's land. "You take the spare room, Miss Cole," Xavier insisted. "I'll bunk with the men tonight." "I couldn't possibly put you out of your home," Bethany protested. "It's no trouble, I'm often on the trail for days. That bunkhouse is like a second home." Left alone in the cabin, Bethany explored the small bedroom he'd offered. A simple iron bed with clean linens, a washstand with fresh water, and a chest of drawers were the only furnishings. On the wall hung a small painting of mountain wildflowers that reminded her of her mother's garden. For the first time since her father's death, Bethany felt safe. She washed her face, combed her hair, and slipped between the clean sheets, listening to the storm rage outside. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Bethany woke disoriented before remembering the events of the previous day. She quickly dressed and stepped into the main room to find Xavier setting out plates for breakfast. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well. Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Thank you for your kindness." "Just doing what anyone would," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would take in a stranger in these parts. They ate a simple breakfast of flapjacks and coffee before setting out for Silver Gulch. This time, Xavier insisted she ride behind him rather than walk. "Hold on tight," he instructed as thunder picked up pace. Reluctantly, Bethany placed her hands lightly on Xavier's waist. As the horse navigated the uneven terrain, she found herself gripping tighter, acutely aware of the solid strength of the man before her. The journey passed quickly. Silver Gulch appeared in the valley below them, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings, the glint of metal rooftops, and the constant movement of people and wagons. "Bigger than I expected," Bethany remarked. "Silver strike 2 years ago brought folks flooding in," Xavier explained. Town's grown faster than anyone could imagine. As they rode down the main street, Bethany took in the sights with wide eyes. A general store, a bank, 3 saloons, a hotel, and various shops lined the muddy thoroughfare. People of all descriptions hurried about their business, miners in dirty clothes, well-dressed businessmen, women in practical frontier wear, and a few in finer Eastern fashions. "Where should I take you?" Xavier asked. "Do you have friends here?" Bethany shook her head. "No one." "I thought perhaps the hotel might need help, or maybe the restaurant." Xavier frowned slightly. "The Silver Palace Hotel isn't the sort of place." He trailed off. "Let me take you to Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house. She's good people and might know of respectable work." Mrs. Whittaker proved to be a round, motherly woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. After hearing Bethany's situation, she offered a small room at a reduced rate for 2 weeks, "just until you find your feet, dear," and promised to ask around about work opportunities. "The mercantile might need help," she suggested. "Mr. Peterson mentioned his wife's been overwhelmed since the baby came." Xavier lingered on the porch as Bethany settled her affairs with Mrs. Whittaker. When she emerged, he stood with his hat in his hands. "I've got business in town for a few days," he said. "Would it be all right if I called on you tomorrow? Make sure you're settling in." Something warm unfurled in Bethany's chest at his concern. "That would be kind, thank you." He nodded, replaced his hat, and mounted Thunder. "Until tomorrow, Miss Cole." Bethany watched him ride away, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought Xavier Blackwood into her life. True to his word, Xavier appeared at the boarding house the following afternoon. Bethany had spent the morning securing a position at Peterson's Mercantile, starting the very next day. The relief of finding employment so quickly had lifted a tremendous weight from her shoulders. "Mrs. Peterson seems kind," she told Xavier as they walked down the boardwalk. "She said I could work 6 days a week, and that Mr. Peterson would teach me the bookkeeping if I show aptitude." "That's good news," Xavier replied. "The Petersons are well respected in town." They strolled past the various establishments, Xavier occasionally tipping his hat to acquaintances. Several people eyed Bethany with undisguised curiosity. "Everyone's staring," she murmured uncomfortably. Xavier smiled. "Small town, new faces always draw attention, especially when they're walking with the likes of me." "Are you infamous, Mr. Blackwood?" she teased. "Hardly. Just a rancher who keeps to himself mostly." He guided her around a muddy patch in the street. "Though I suppose they're not used to seeing me with a beautiful woman on my arm." Bethany felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. No one had called her beautiful before. Pretty, perhaps, but never beautiful. She wasn't sure how to respond. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn." "No, it's fine," she assured him. "I'm just not accustomed to compliments." He looked at her thoughtfully, but didn't press the matter. The next 2 weeks established a pattern. Bethany worked diligently at the Mercantile, learning the business quickly and earning Mrs. Peterson's approval. Xavier visited Silver Gulch every few days, always making time to see Bethany. Sometimes they simply walked through town. Other times he took her to the small restaurant for dinner. Mrs. Whittaker observed their growing friendship with approval. "That Xavier Blackwood is a good man," she told Bethany one evening as they sat on the porch. "Built that ranch from nothing after coming back from the war, never causes trouble, pays his debts, treats everyone fair." "You know him well?" Bethany asked. "Known him since he arrived 6 years ago, stayed here while building his first cabin." Mrs. Whittaker rocked gently in her chair. "Been through his share of hardship, that one. Lost his whole family in the war, parents, younger brother. Fought for the Union, came west afterward like so many others looking to start fresh." Bethany considered this information. It explained the occasional shadow she sometimes glimpsed in Xavier's eyes, a familiar sorrow she recognized from her own reflection. On the Sunday marking 3 weeks since her arrival in Silver Gulch, Xavier invited Bethany for a ride in the countryside. Mrs. Peterson had given her Sundays off, and the autumn day dawned clear and mild. Xavier arrived with Thunder and a gentle mare he introduced as Daisy. "Thought you might enjoy riding on your own today." "I haven't ridden since I was a girl," Bethany admitted. "Daisy's gentle as they come. She'll take good care of you." They rode out of town, following a creek that wound through aspen groves glowing golden in the autumn light. Bethany quickly remembered the rhythm of horseback riding, and soon they were traveling side by side, conversation flowing easily between them. Xavier led them to a small meadow surrounded by pines, where a blanket of late wildflowers painted the ground in purples and yellows. They dismounted, and Xavier spread a blanket for their picnic lunch. "It's beautiful here," Bethany said, accepting the sandwich he offered. "One of my favorite spots," Xavier replied. "Found it my first year here when I was scouting grazing land." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the gentle rushing of the creek and the occasional bird call. Afterward, Xavier leaned back on his elbows, face tilted to the sun. "May I ask you something, Bethany?" he said, using her given name for the first time. She nodded, curious. "What are your plans? Will you stay in Silver Gulch?" Bethany plucked a blade of grass, considering. "I don't know. The work at the mercantile is good and Mrs. Whitaker says I can stay at the boarding house as long as I need, but it doesn't feel like home," Xavier finished for her. "No," she admitted, "though I'm not sure anywhere will again." Xavier sat up, his blue eyes intent on her face. "I understand that feeling. After the war, after losing my family, I wandered for almost 2 years. Worked cattle drives, took odd jobs, never staying anywhere long. Nothing felt right until I found this valley." "What changed?" Bethany asked softly. "I realized home isn't just a place, it's a feeling." He gestured to the mountains surrounding them. "This land spoke to me somehow. I knew I could build something here, something lasting." Bethany thought about his words. "My father always said we were rooted to our land like the old oak by the creek. I thought when we lost it, I lost everything." But maybe he was wrong about being rooted to one place. "Maybe home is something you carry inside," Xavier suggested. "Something you can rebuild." Their eyes met, and Bethany felt a connection deeper than any she'd known before. This man understood loss as she did, had faced the emptiness and chosen to begin again. The moment was broken by distant thunder. Dark clouds were gathering over the western peaks. "We should head back," Xavier said reluctantly. "These mountain storms move fast." They packed up quickly and mounted their horses. The temperature dropped as they rode, the wind picking up strength. They were still a mile from town when the rain began gentle at first, then a sudden downpour. "There's a line shack just ahead," Xavier called over the storm. "We can wait it out there." They urged their horses forward, soon reaching a small wooden structure nestled among the pines. Xavier dismounted quickly, leading both horses to a lean-to at the side of the cabin while Bethany hurried inside. The line shack was a single room with a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Bethany stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly conscious of her soaked dress clinging to her frame. Xavier entered, equally drenched, carrying saddlebags. "At least we won't starve," he said with a smile, then noticed her shivering. "You're freezing. Let me get a fire started." He moved efficiently, building a fire from the stacked wood beside the hearth. Soon flames danced in the fireplace, casting warmth and light through the dim interior. "There are some blankets in that trunk," Xavier said, pointing, "and I think there might be coffee on that shelf. I'll check on the horses." When he returned, Bethany had wrapped herself in a blanket and was heating water for coffee. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the roof. "Looks like we might be here a while," Xavier observed, hanging his wet duster by the fire. "That storm's settling in." Bethany handed him a cup of coffee. "I'm sorry about our picnic." "Don't be. I'm enjoying the company regardless of the setting." His smile was warm, genuine. They sat before the fire, talking as the storm raged. Xavier told stories of his early days ranching, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons learned, the gradual building of his dream. Bethany shared memories of her parents, of the good years before her mother's illness, of her father's determination to keep their land despite mounting debts. As evening approached, the rain showed no signs of letting up. A new tension grew between them as they realized they might need to spend the night. "I should ride back," Xavier said finally. "Mrs. Whitaker will worry, and folks might talk if we're both missing overnight. In this weather. You could get struck by lightning, or the horses might slip on the muddy trail." Bethany surprised herself with her vehemence. I'd rather face gossip than learn you'd been injured trying to protect my reputation. Xavier studied her face. Are you certain? She nodded. We're grown people caught in a storm. There's nothing improper in that. He seemed relieved. Thank you. I confess I wasn't looking forward to riding in that deluge. He moved to the small cupboard. Let's see what provisions we have for dinner. They made a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack, supplemented with coffee. As they ate, Bethany realized how comfortable she felt in Xavier's presence. There was none of the awkwardness she often experienced with others, no need to fill silence with empty words. After dinner, Xavier insisted Bethany take the narrow bed while he slept on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he was adamant. I've slept on the ground more nights than I can count, he assured her. This wooden floor with a blanket is luxury compared to some places I've bedded down. Reluctantly, Bethany agreed. She lay under the rough wool blanket, listening to the rain on the roof and Xavier's steady breathing across the room. Despite the strange circumstances, she felt safe, protected. Xavier, she said softly into the darkness. Yes, thank you. Not just for today, but for everything since we met. Your kindness has meant more than I can say. There was a pause before he answered. You don't need to thank me, Bethany. I've enjoyed every moment of your company. Another silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. May I ask you something personal? Xavier's voice came quietly through the darkness. Yes. You've never mentioned any young man from your hometown. Was there no one special in your life before you came to Silver Gulch? Bethany stared at the rough-hewn ceiling, considering her answer. There was someone once, Thomas Hargrove. We grew up together and everyone assumed we'd marry someday. She sighed. When my mother died and my father struggled with the farm, Thomas changed. He started courting the banker's daughter instead. He was a fool, Xavier said simply. Perhaps, Bethany replied, or perhaps he was practical. Why tie himself to a girl with nothing but debts and a failing farm? Because love isn't practical, Xavier said, his voice low and intense. It isn't about ledger books and balances. Real love means standing beside someone through the hard times, not just the easy ones. His words stirred something in Bethany's heart, a longing she'd buried deep after Thomas's betrayal. I'm not sure I know what real love is anymore, she confessed, or if I'd recognize it if it found me. The fire crackled in the silence that followed her admission. I think, Xavier finally said, that when it's real, you'll know, it won't need explaining or analyzing, it will simply be as natural as breathing. Bethany pondered his words as sleep gradually claimed her, the steady rhythm of rain and the presence of the man across the room bringing a peace she hadn't known in years. Morning brought clearing skies and birdsong. Bethany woke to find Xavier already up, tending to the horses. She quickly straightened her appearance as best she could with limited resources, then joined him outside. Beautiful morning, she commented, breathing in the fresh, rain-washed air. Xavier turned, a smile lighting his face at the sight of her. The best kind. Storms cleaned everything, made it new again. They rode back to Silver Gulch in companionable silence, both aware that something had shifted between them during the night's storm. Boundaries crossed, confidences shared, a deeper understanding forged. As they approached the outskirts of town, Xavier cleared his throat. Bethany, I need to be away for a while. There's a cattle auction in Denver I've been planning to attend. I'll be gone about 2 weeks. Disappointment washed through her, sharper than she expected. Oh, when do you leave? Tomorrow morning, early, he glanced at her. I'd planned to tell you yesterday before the storm changed our plans. Bethany nodded, forcing a smile. I hope the auction goes well for you. Would it be all right if I wrote to you while I'm away? Xavier asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. I'd like that very much, she replied honestly. They parted at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house with a formal handshake that somehow felt inadequate after all they'd shared. Bethany watched him ride away, a strange emptiness settling in her chest. Mrs. Whittaker was full of questions about where Bethany had spent the night, but seemed satisfied with the explanation of being caught in the storm at one of Xavier's line shacks. Providence looks after fools and good people, the older woman said with a knowing smile. And since neither you nor Xavier are fools, the next 2 weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness. Bethany threw herself into her work at the mercantile, earning Mr. Peterson's praise for her meticulous attention to the account books. In the evenings, she helped Mrs. Whittaker with chores around the boarding house and joined the other boarders, 2 school teachers, and an elderly widower for meals and occasional card games. Xavier's first letter arrived 5 days after his departure, delivered by Josiah, who had business in town. Bethany retreated to her room to read it privately. The letter was written in a strong, clear hand on quality paper. Xavier described his journey to Denver, the changing landscape as he traveled south, and his impressions of the growing city. He wrote of the cattle he hoped to purchase and his plans for expanding his herd. The letter ended with a simple line that Bethany read multiple times. "The mountains here are impressive, but I find myself missing the view from Silver Gulch and the company I enjoyed while admiring it." Bethany wrote back that same evening, describing her days at the mercantile, the town gossip Mrs. Whittaker shared, and her growing confidence in her new life. She hesitated over the closing, finally settling on "your friend, Bethany," though the word friend seemed inadequate for what she was beginning to feel. A second letter from Xavier arrived 3 days before his expected return. This one contained news that sent Bethany's emotions into turmoil. "I've had unexpected success at the auction. Not only have I purchased 30 prime heifers at a favorable price, but I've also secured a contract to supply beef to the military fort being established near Laramie. This will mean significant expansion for my ranch operations. I've already hired 6 additional hands who will travel north with me and the new cattle. This opportunity is everything I've worked toward these past years, Bethany. A chance to build something truly substantial, something that could support not just me but a family someday. The thought fills me with both excitement and trepidation. I find myself thinking of our conversation in the line shack during the storm about home being something you carry inside, something you can rebuild. I believe that more strongly than ever now. I'll return to Silver Gulch by week's end. There's much I wish to discuss with you in person." Bethany read between the lines, her heart racing. Was Xavier suggesting what she thought? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. After Thomas's rejection, she had walled off that vulnerable part of herself, convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. The day of Xavier's expected return, Bethany found herself distracted at work, earning a gentle reprimand from Mrs. Peterson when she miscounted a customer's change. She watched the street through the mercantile windows, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar chestnut stallion. Evening came with no sign of Xavier. Disappointed, Bethany returned to the boarding house for dinner. Mrs. Whittaker greeted her with news. "Rider came through town an hour ago. Says there's a large herd moving up from the south, probably reach town by tomorrow. Must be your Mr. Blackwood with his new cattle." "He's not my Mr. Blackwood," Bethany protested weakly, though the thought sent a pleasant warmth through her. Mrs. Whittaker merely smiled knowingly. The cattle drive reached Silver Gulch the following afternoon. Bethany was arranging a display of canned goods when the commotion began. Outside shouts, the lowing of cattle, the thunder of hundreds of hooves. She stepped onto the boardwalk, shading her eyes against the sun. The main street was filled with dust and movement as cowboys expertly guided the herd through town. At the forefront rode Xavier, issuing commands to his men, his face bronzed from days in the sun. He looked different, somehow larger than life, commanding, confident in his element. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Xavier's serious expression transformed into a brilliant smile. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, but couldn't stop to talk as the herd required his attention. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Mr. Peterson had joined Bethany on the boardwalk. "That's the biggest herd Blackwood's ever driven through. Must have done well at that auction." "Yes," Bethany agreed, her eyes never leaving Xavier's tall figure as he disappeared down the street with his cattle. "He mentioned a contract with the military. Good for him. He's worked hard for this." Mr. Peterson glanced at her with shrewd eyes. "He's a good man, that one, not one for saloons or gambling, keeps his word and treats folks fair." Bethany nodded, wondering if the entire town had noticed her connection to Xavier. The thought should have embarrassed her, but somehow it didn't. Let them talk. She was proud to be associated with such a man. That evening, a knock at the boarding house door interrupted dinner. Mrs. Whittaker answered it, then called for Bethany with a knowing smile. Xavier stood on the porch, hat in hand, his clothes still dusty from the trail. Despite his obvious fatigue, his face brightened at the sight of her. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner," he said, "but I couldn't wait until tomorrow to see you. Would you like to join us?" Bethany offered. "There's plenty," he shook his head. "I need to get back to the herd. We're bedding them down just outside town tonight before moving on to my ranch tomorrow." He hesitated. "But I was hoping you might walk with me for a few minutes." Bethany quickly fetched her shawl, ignoring Mrs. Whittaker's meaningful glance. They strolled down the quiet residential street, the setting sun painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Your letters didn't do justice to how much I'd miss seeing you," Xavier said after a moment. Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "I missed you too." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Bethany, these past weeks have given me time to think about my life, my ranch, my future." His blue eyes were intense, focused solely on her. "Before I met you, I thought building my ranch was enough. Now I realize there's something missing, someone to share it with." Bethany's heart hammered in her chest. "Xavier, I'm not asking for promises yet," he said quickly. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but I want you to know my intentions. I care for you, Bethany, more than I thought possible, and if you might someday feel the same." "I already do," she admitted softly. Joy lit his features. He took her hands in his. "Then would you consider visiting my ranch this Sunday? I'd like to show you what I've built, what I hope to build in the future." "I'd like that very much." Xavier's smile was radiant in the fading light. "I'll come for you after church." He walked her back to the boarding house, both of them quiet, absorbing the significance of what had just transpired between them. At the steps, Xavier lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Sunday," he murmured. Bethany barely slept that night, her mind spinning with possibilities. Was she ready for what Xavier seemed to be offering? After losing her parents, her home, everything familiar, could she open her heart to someone new? The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunshine, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Bethany wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Whittaker helped her arrange her hair, tucking late blooming wildflowers into the simple updo. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said approvingly. "That Xavier won't know what hit him." Xavier arrived promptly after the church service, driving a smart buggy pulled by his stallion Thunder. He helped Bethany up, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. The journey to his ranch took just over an hour. As they crested a rise, Xavier reined the horses to a stop. Below them spread a verdant valley, bisected by a clear stream. A substantial log house stood near the water, surrounded by several outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling grasslands that stretched toward the mountains. "Welcome to the Blackwood Ranch," Xavier said, pride evident in his voice. "It's beautiful," Bethany breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "I started with just that small cabin there," he pointed to a structure near the main house. "Built the big house last year, thought it seemed too empty with just me, but," he glanced at her, "maybe someday it won't be." The implication hung in the air between them as they continued down the slope. As they approached, Bethany noticed the details of the main house, the wide porch wrapping around three sides, the stone chimney, the glass windows that must have been expensive to transport from the east. Inside, the house revealed Xavier's attention to both practicality and comfort. The large main room held solid, well-crafted furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes, and colorful Navajo rugs on the polished wood floors. A cast-iron cookstove gleamed in the kitchen area, and doors led to what Bethany presumed were bedrooms. "You've created a real home here," she said, running her hand along the smooth surface of a walnut dining table. "It's missing a woman's touch," Xavier replied honestly. "But I wanted to build something substantial before." He trailed off. "Before what?" Bethany prompted gently. "Before asking someone to share it with me." Their eyes met, the moment charged with unspoken meaning. Xavier cleared his throat. I'd like to show you the rest of the ranch, if you'd like. The afternoon passed swiftly as Xavier guided Bethany through his domain. He showed her the barn where Thunder and the other horses were stabled, the corrals where new calves were born each spring, the smokehouse where meat was preserved for winter. Everywhere they went, ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully, curiosity in their eyes at the presence of a lady. They picnicked by the stream on the same blanket they'd used during their first outing together. As they ate, Xavier spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, adding sheep perhaps, planting an orchard on the south-facing slope. "You've thought of everything," Bethany observed. "Not everything," Xavier said quietly, "just the practical matters, but a home needs more than that. It needs laughter, conversation, maybe children someday." He looked at her intently. "It needs love." Bethany's heart raced at his words. "Xavier." "I'm not asking for an answer today," he assured her. "I know this is sudden, but I wanted you to see this place, to understand what I'm offering, not just a home but a partnership, a life together." "I don't know what to say," Bethany admitted, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling between them. Xavier reached across the blanket, taking her hand in his. "You don't need to say anything yet. Just know that whenever you're ready, I'll be waiting." The ride back to Silver Gulch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the boarding house, Xavier finally broke the silence. "Will you have dinner with me Friday evening? There's a new restaurant opened at the hotel that's supposed to be quite good." "I'd like that," Bethany replied. He helped her down from the buggy, his hands gentle at her waist. For a moment, Bethany thought he might kiss her, but he simply squeezed her hands before releasing them. "Thank you for today," she said. "Your ranch is wonderful. You should be proud of what you've built." "It's just land and buildings without someone to share it with," he answered quietly. The week passed in a blur of work and anticipation. By Friday evening, Bethany was a bundle of nerves as she dressed for dinner. Mrs. Whittaker had loaned her a pearl hair comb that complemented her green dress, her one fine garment, saved from her former life. "You look like a vision, Mrs. Whittaker declared. That Xavier Blackwood won't know what hit him. The Silver Palace Hotel's restaurant was the finest establishment in Silver Gulch, with white tablecloths, proper china, and a small ensemble playing gentle music in the corner. Heads turned as Xavier escorted Bethany to their table, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Everyone's staring," Bethany whispered. "Let them," Xavier replied with a smile. "I'm dining with the most beautiful woman in the territory. They should stare." The meal was exquisite by frontier standards: tender venison, fresh vegetables, and apple pie with real cream for dessert. They talked easily, sharing stories and dreams. Xavier spoke of books he'd read, places he hoped to visit someday. Bethany described her mother's garden, how she'd learned to identify wildflowers and their medicinal uses. As they lingered over coffee, the small orchestra began playing a waltz. Several couples moved to the small dance floor. "Would you do me the honor?" Xavier asked, extending his hand. "It's been years since I danced," Bethany protested. "I'll lead," he promised with a smile that made her heart flutter. In his arms, Bethany felt both safe and exhilarated. Xavier moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, guiding her through the steps she'd nearly forgotten. "You dance beautifully," he murmured near her ear. "Only because you're leading," she replied. Their eyes met, and the rest of the room seemed to fade away. In that moment, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Xavier Blackwood. The realization terrified her. After the dance, Xavier walked her back to the boarding house. On the porch, sheltered from curious eyes by the darkness, he finally gave in to what they'd both been feeling. His hand gently cupped her cheek, tilting her face upward. "May I?" he whispered. Bethany nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent. His lips brushed hers with exquisite tenderness, as if she were something precious he feared might break. When he pulled away, his eyes searched hers in the dim light. "I'm falling in love with you, Bethany Cole," he said simply. The words should have filled her with joy. Instead, a cold wave of panic washed through her. Images flashed through her mind: her mother's wasted form as consumption claimed her, her father's grief-stricken face, Thomas walking away when times grew difficult. "I can't," she whispered, stepping back. "I'm sorry, Xavier, but I can't do this." Confusion and hurt flickered across his face. "Bethany, everyone I've ever loved has left me or been taken away," she said, tears threatening. "I can't bear it again, I'm sorry." Before he could respond, she fled inside, closing the door on his bewildered expression. Mrs. Whitaker emerged from the parlor at the sound of Bethany's rapid footsteps on the stairs, but wisely asked no questions at the sight of her tear-stained face. In her room, Bethany sank onto her bed, trembling. She should feel elated that this wonderful man loved her. Instead, all she felt was terror, the same clawing fear that had haunted her since her father's death. The fear of losing everything again. The next morning, Bethany rose early, hoping to avoid Mrs. Whitaker's questions. She slipped out before breakfast and walked to the mercantile, grateful that the Petersons had given her a key to open the shop on Saturdays. The familiar tasks of sweeping the floor, arranging displays, and checking inventory provided some distraction, but Xavier's words echoed in her mind. "I'm falling in love with you." No one had ever said those words to her before, not even Thomas, despite their understanding. Mid-morning, the bell above the door jingled. Bethany looked up from the ledger to find Mrs. Whitaker entering the store. "Thought I might find you hiding here," the older woman said without preamble. "Want to tell me why you ran away from that fine man last night?" Bethany sighed. There was no avoiding this conversation. It's complicated, love usually is. Mrs. Whitaker settled her substantial frame on a stool by the counter, but running away rarely solves anything. "I'm afraid," Bethany admitted quietly, "of Xavier, because if he's done anything improper, no. No, he's been nothing but honorable." Bethany shook her head. "I'm afraid of losing him, of loving him and then watching him leave or die like everyone else I've cared about." Understanding softened Mrs. Whitaker's face. "Ah, child, that's the risk we all take when we love someone. There are no guarantees in this life. Then why risk it at all?" Bethany asked, voicing the question that had tormented her through the sleepless night. "Because a life without love is only half-lived," Mrs. Whitaker replied simply. "I had 30 years with my Harold before the Lord took him home. Would I trade those years to avoid the pain of losing him? Not for all the gold in Colorado." She reached across the counter to pat Bethany's hand. "Love is always worth the risk, my dear." Bethany considered the older woman's words throughout the day. By closing time, she had made her decision. She would find Xavier, explain her fears, and ask for his patience. But when she returned to the boarding house, Mrs. Whitaker met her with troubling news. "Xavier came by earlier. Said to tell you he's been called away on urgent business, something about his cattle contract. He's riding to Fort Laramie tonight." "Tonight?" Bethany's heart sank. "Did he say when he'd return?" Mrs. Whitaker shook her head. "Just that it might be a while. He looked mighty troubled, if you don't mind my saying so." Bethany felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Had she ruined everything with her panic? Would Xavier reconsider his feelings during his absence? The next week passed with excruciating slowness. Bethany threw herself into work, taking on extra hours at the mercantile and helping Mrs. Whitaker with the boarding house accounts. Anything to keep her mind occupied, to prevent it from replaying that moment on the porch when she'd pushed Xavier away. 10 days after Xavier's departure, Josiah appeared at the mercantile. The foreman removed his hat as he approached the counter. "Miss Cole," he greeted her formally. "Boss asked me to deliver this." He handed her an envelope. "Is he back?" Bethany asked eagerly. Josiah shook his head. "Still at Fort Laramie. Contract negotiations are taking longer than expected." He hesitated. "He seems different, quieter." Guilt stabbed through Bethany. "Thank you for bringing this, Josiah." Once alone, she opened the letter with trembling fingers. "Dear Bethany, I write from Fort Laramie, where military bureaucracy moves at its own pace. The contract negotiations progress slowly, though I expect to conclude business within the week. I must apologize for my abrupt departure. After our evening together, I needed time to think. I spoke too boldly, pressed too quickly, and clearly caused you distress. That was never my intention. Please know that my feelings remain unchanged, but I understand if yours differ. I would never wish to cause you pain or discomfort. If friendship is all you can offer, I will treasure that gift and ask for nothing more. I expect to return to Silver Gulch by month's end. Until then, I remain, yours sincerely, Xavier. Tears blurred Bethany's vision as she read the letter a second time. Even now, thinking she had rejected him, Xavier was still considerate of her feelings, still putting her comfort above his own desires. How many men would be so understanding? She took out paper and pen immediately. Dear Xavier, your letter finds me well but troubled by the circumstances of our parting. The fault was entirely mine, not yours. You spoke from your heart with honesty and honor while I responded with fear. The truth is that I have lost everyone I ever loved, my mother to illness, my father to heart failure, even my childhood sweetheart to ambition and greed. These losses have made me afraid to love again, afraid to risk my heart. But in your absence, I have come to realize something important. I am already in love with you. The pain I feel at our separation proves it beyond doubt. I miss your smile, your steady presence, your quiet strength. I miss our conversations and the way you make me feel safe yet exhilarated all at once. You asked if friendship is all I can offer. The answer is no. I can offer much more: my heart, my trust, my future if you still want them. I cannot promise never to be afraid again, but I can promise to face those fears with courage if you are beside me. Please come home soon. With love, Bethany. She sealed the letter and gave it to Josiah the next day when he stopped for supplies. The waiting that followed was the hardest yet. Each day, Bethany scanned the street for a glimpse of a familiar rider on a chestnut stallion. Each night, she fell asleep wondering where Xavier was, if he had received her letter, what his response might be. 2 weeks after sending her letter, Bethany was arranging a new shipment of fabric at the mercantile when Mrs. Peterson called her name. "Bethany, dear, there's someone here to see you." She turned, her heart leaping at the sight of Xavier standing in the doorway. He looked travel-worn, his face bronzed from weeks outdoors, but his blue eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Xavier," she whispered. "Bethany, could you step outside for a moment?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Mrs. Peterson nodded encouragingly. "Go on, dear, I can manage here." Outside on the boardwalk, Bethany faced Xavier, suddenly unsure what to say despite the letter she'd poured her heart into. "You got my letter?" she finally asked. "I did." His expression remained guarded. "Did you mean it, all of it?" "Every word," she replied without hesitation. Something in his posture relaxed slightly. "I've been thinking about what you wrote about fear, about loss." He took a step closer. "I can't promise you'll never lose me, Bethany. None of us know what tomorrow brings. But I can promise that as long as I draw a breath, I will never willingly leave you. I will fight with everything I have to come back to you always." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. "I don't know how to be loved," she admitted softly. "Not anymore. I've been alone too long." Xavier reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then let me teach you," he whispered. The tenderness in his voice broke the last of Bethany's resistance. She stepped into his embrace, feeling his strong arms encircle her, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "I love you, Xavier Blackwood," she murmured against his chest. "I'm sorry I was too afraid to say it before." He tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Bethany Cole, and I will spend every day showing you that love is nothing to fear." This time when he kissed her, Bethany didn't pull away. She melted into him, returning his kiss with all the emotion she'd held back before. They were oblivious to the curious stares of passers-by, lost in the joy of finding each other at last. That evening, Xavier formally asked for Bethany's hand during dinner at the boarding house. Mrs. Whitaker beamed her approval, dabbing at happy tears. "I've known from the first time I saw you two together," she declared. "Some things are just meant to be." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Silver Gulch. The Petersons stood as witnesses, along with Josiah and Mrs. Whitaker. Bethany wore a cream silk dress ordered specially from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Xavier couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Xavier promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life, Bethany felt the last of her fear dissolve. This was right. This was home. The journey to the Blackwood Ranch afterward was filled with laughter and plans. Xavier pointed out improvements he'd made during her absence: a garden plot behind the house, new curtains in the windows, a rocking chair on the porch. Mrs. Whittaker helped with the curtains, he admitted. I wanted it to feel like home for you from the first moment. As they approached the house, Xavier surprised Bethany by gathering her into his arms. Tradition, he explained with a smile, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the house had been transformed. Fresh flowers stood in vases, a fire crackled in the hearth despite the mild autumn day, and a special dinner waited on the table, prepared by the ranch cook before he discreetly retired to the bunkhouse with the other hands. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood, Xavier said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Home, Bethany repeated, testing the word. Yes, this feels like home already. Later, as twilight deepened into night, they stood on the porch watching stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky. Xavier's arm rested comfortably around Bethany's shoulders, her head leaned against his chest. Are you happy? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Happier than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. I spent so long being afraid to love, afraid to lose. But you were right, home isn't just a place, it's a feeling. She turned in his arms to face him, and home is wherever you are. Xavier's smile in the moonlight made her heart race. Then let me take you home, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered, leading her inside to begin their life together. Spring came to the Blackwood Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new calves. Bethany had adapted to ranch life with surprising ease, finding joy in creating a true home with Xavier. She tended a flourishing garden, learned to make cheese from the milk of their small dairy herd, and even mastered riding alongside Xavier on Gentle Daisy. On their 6-month anniversary, they rode to the meadow where they'd shared their first picnic. Xavier spread a blanket beneath a flowering crabapple tree, and they enjoyed a feast of cold chicken, fresh bread, and strawberry preserves Bethany had put up the previous summer. I have something for you, Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. Inside, Bethany found a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she gasped. On one side was a tiny photograph of her parents from the picture she treasured, and on the other, a new photograph of her and Xavier on their wedding day. How did you? She began, tears filling her eyes. I had a photographer in Denver copy your parents' picture, Xavier explained. I wanted you to have all your loves with you always. Bethany threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. It's perfect, you're perfect. Xavier laughed, holding her close. Hardly perfect, but I try to be what you need. You are exactly what I need, she assured him. Everything I need. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the meadow, Bethany rested her head on Xavier's shoulder. I have something for you too, she said softly. Oh, he looked at her curiously. Not exactly something I can wrap. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. But in about 7 months, there will be 3 of us at the Blackwood Ranch. Xavier's eyes widened, joy and wonder spreading across his features. Bethany, are you certain? She nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his face. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. With a whoop of joy, Xavier jumped to his feet, pulling Bethany up with him. He swung her around in a gentle circle, then set her carefully on her feet, suddenly concerned. Should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby. Bethany laughed, cupping his face in her hands. We're fine, Xavier, both of us. He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. A baby, he whispered in awe. Our baby. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman walking alone on a dusty road to the confident, loved wife and mother to be, she was now the transformation seemed miraculous. What are you thinking about? Xavier asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. About how much my life has changed since I met you, she replied. About how you taught me to love again when I thought that part of me was dead forever. Xavier reached across to take her hand. We taught each other, Bethany. You showed me that a house isn't a home until it's filled with love. In the soft evening light, Bethany could see their future stretching before them, their child growing up strong and free in this beautiful valley, perhaps brothers and sisters to follow, years of building their ranch and their life together. There would be hardships, she knew. The frontier was unforgiving and life offered no guarantees, But for the first time since she was a girl, Bethany faced the future without fear. Whatever came, they would face it together, and that made all the difference. "I love you, Xavier Blackwood," she said, squeezing his hand. His smile was as warm as the setting sun. "And I love you, Bethany Blackwood, today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As their home came into view, lights glowing welcomingly in the windows, Bethany felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. This was her home. This was her love, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.